The official police report states 16-year-old Emily Jenkins vanished sometime after school on October 21, 2019. Her stepmother, Brenda, reported her missing at 8 p.m., claiming Emily never returned home. But here's what the initial investigation overlooked. Emily was already inside that house. That detail matters because it completely unravels the official narrative, forcing us to ask what really happened after Emily walked through that door. Let's walk through the initial timeline. Monday, October 21, 2019. Emily leaves for Northwood High at 8 a.m., a fact confirmed by Brenda. This is the last confirmed sighting of Emily outside the home. School dismisses at 3:30 p.m. Emily's friend, Chloe Peterson, texts her about homework, a message that goes unanswered. Chloe notes this as unusual. This seemingly small detail begins to paint a picture of an immediate disruption to Emily's routine. At 5 p.m., Brenda Jenkins calls Emily's father, David, who is away on a business trip. She reports Emily hasn't returned from school. David, understanding the usual teenage routine, advises waiting a few hours. 2 hours later, at 8 p.m., Brenda reports Emily missing to local police, maintaining the story that Emily never arrived home. The house, she claimed, was simply empty. And for a brief period, that was the story. The next day, detectives Miller and Reyes visit the Jenkins home. Brenda appears distraught, cooperative, and consistent in her account. Emily went to school and just never came back. It seemed like a straightforward missing persons case, a teenager who perhaps ran away or got into trouble. But the evidence suggests something far more complex. The official version leaves this unexplained. If Emily never came home, why would her personal belongings, her phone and laptop, also be missing from a home that showed no signs of forced entry? This is where it gets strange, where the timeline doesn't add up. A family's first call. Brenda Jenkins called the local police at exactly 8 p.m. She reported her 16-year-old stepdaughter Emily missing. Brenda stated Emily had gone to school that morning and simply never returned home. This was the initial framework, the official story, but here's where it gets strange. Earlier that afternoon, around 5 p.m., Brenda had already called Emily's father, David Jenkins, who was away on a business trip. She told him Emily hadn't returned home from school. David, perhaps trying to calm her, advised Brenda to wait a few hours before panicking. Which raises the question, why did Brenda wait 3 hours to call the police, describing the exact same situation she had reported at 5 p.m.? The empty house presented one mystery. The first call to the authorities and the timeline around it presents another. The next morning, Tuesday, October 22nd, detectives Miller and Reyes arrived at the Jenkins home. Brenda maintained her story, outwardly distraught but cooperative. She repeated that Emily had gone to school and simply vanished. Yet a closer look at her composure, her almost rehearsed narrative, left a subtle impression on the lead investigator. No signs of forced entry were found. No struggle. Emily's personal belongings, her phone, her laptop, were missing from her room. This detail matters. Were they taken by Emily herself? Or were they removed by someone else? The official record notes Brenda's willingness to cooperate. But the timeline of the initial report, spanning those 3 unaccounted hours, quietly gnaws at the edges of her proclaimed distress. What happened during that window? What was Brenda doing, waiting for, or perhaps covering up for those 180 minutes before alerting law enforcement? The evidence, even in its absence, begins to speak. The missing teen. Brenda Jenkins called the local police at 8 p.m., reporting Emily had never returned home from school. She was distraught, she claimed, unable to comprehend where her stepdaughter could be. This phone call, however, immediately raised a critical question. When, exactly, did Brenda realize Emily was missing? The official timeline states Emily left for Northwood High at 8 a.m. on Monday, October 21, 2019. Nobody disputes that part. School dismissed at 3:30 p.m. Emily's friend, Chloe Peterson, even texted her around that time, asking about homework. Chloe received no reply, unusual for Emily, who typically responded quickly. According to Brenda's initial account, Emily simply never arrived home. The house was empty. But what if Emily did come home? What if Brenda's story wasn't the full picture from the very beginning? Detective Miller and Detective Reyes visited the Jenkins home the next morning, Tuesday, October 22nd. Brenda repeated her narrative. Emily went to school, Emily never returned. She maintained this story even as detectives searched the house. No forced entry, No signs of struggle. But Emily's phone was gone. So was her laptop. That detail matters. Her most personal belongings, devices she routinely used, were missing. If she never came home, who took them? The initial police report leaves that unexplained. Now, here's where the timeline gets problematic. Detectives later reviewed local CCTV footage near Northwood High, dated Monday, October 21st. The footage clearly shows Emily walking towards the school that morning, but her return journey, later that afternoon? It was not captured on any available cameras. This doesn't immediately contradict Brenda's claim that Emily never made it home. But let's remember this. She was seen going to school. What doesn't add up is what happened to Emily after 3:30 p.m. The evidence suggests Emily did not simply vanish on her way back from school. Her stepmom's account. Brenda Jenkins's account was consistent, almost too consistent. When detectives Miller and Reyes arrived at the Jenkins home on October 22nd, the day after Emily was reported missing, Brenda maintained a calm, if distraught, demeanor. She reiterated Emily left for Northwood High at 8 a.m. on Monday, October 21st, after breakfast, a detail she'd already shared with David. Emily, she claimed, simply never returned home from school. Her story remained unchanged through initial questioning. Brenda appeared cooperative, answering every inquiry without hesitation. The police conducted a preliminary search. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. Emily's personal belongings, her phone, her laptop were gone. This, Brenda suggested, supported her theory that Emily perhaps ran away or was taken after school. But that's where the timeline shows its first significant wrinkle. 4 days later, on Friday, October 25th, detectives reviewed local CCTV footage near Northwood High. The cameras showed Emily walking towards the school on Monday morning, exactly as Brenda had stated. However, this footage also revealed something crucial. Emily's return journey. Her exit from the school area, it was not captured on any available cameras after dismissal. That detail, in itself, isn't immediately damning. What truly didn't add up is this. If Emily never made it home from school, as Brenda insisted, what about the witness who saw her walking towards it? If she went to school, she should have returned, or appeared on other cameras later. The official version Brenda presented left a significant undiscussed gap. The footage could not place Emily on her way home, and this omission would soon become a very disturbing piece of the puzzle, a shadow across Brenda's seemingly solid account. The conflicting timelines. Brenda Jenkins maintained her story. Emily had left for school that Monday morning, October 21st, and simply never returned, or so she claimed. But this narrative, the official version Brenda presented to authorities, began to unravel almost immediately when investigators started to look at the hard evidence. We need to go back and check the record, specifically the CCTV footage near Northwood High. What the initial search revealed was troubling. Emily was seen walking towards the school at approximately 8 a.m., just as Brenda stated. That detail, however, only confirmed a fraction of the story. Crucially, her return journey was not captured on any available cameras. Not at 3:30 p.m., when class is dismissed, nor an hour later or two. This raised an immediate question. If Emily never came home, why couldn't her departure from the school vicinity be accounted for? The absence of evidence here is, in itself, a form of evidence. This doesn't necessarily contradict Brenda's claim that Emily didn't arrive home. It simply fails to corroborate it. But what if Emily did make it home? What if Brenda's timeline was designed to mask precisely that fact? According to the police report, detectives conducted a preliminary search of the Jenkins home on Tuesday, October 22nd. No signs of forced entry, no struggle. Emily's personal belongings, including her phone and laptop, were missing. This initial assessment seemed to support the idea of Emily running away, or perhaps being abducted before she reached the house. But here's where it gets strange. Weeks later, on Friday, November 1st, forensics confirmed a small blood stain on a rug in Emily's bedroom. And that stain belonged to Emily herself. The stain had been professionally cleaned, almost rendering it invisible. This suggests Emily was in the house after school dismissal on October 21st. The official version Brenda gave, that Emily never arrived home from school, simply doesn't hold up against this physical evidence. The timeline doesn't add up. Emily's blood in her cleaned bedroom. Chloe Peterson's texts unanswered. The missing CCTV footage of her return. This isn't a small inconsistency. It points to a deliberate effort to conceal. A disturbing web search. The previous timeline suggested Emily Jenkins never returned home from school on Monday, October 21st. Brenda Jenkins insisted on this point, maintaining that Emily simply vanished after dismissal. Her initial demeanor, while distraught, appeared cooperative. But then, investigators found something that fundamentally shifted their perspective: a disturbing web search made by Brenda Jenkins herself. That detail matters. On Wednesday, October 30th, detectives accessed Brenda's digital footprint. What they uncovered contradicted everything she had told them. Her search history from the very afternoon Emily disappeared, the afternoon Brenda claimed Emily was still missing from school, contained phrases like "how long before missing person is presumed dead." This wasn't an isolated query. The records also showed searches for how to dispose of large items. Think about that. While police were just beginning their search, while Emily's father David was still away on business, Brenda was searching for information on disposing of large items and the legalities surrounding a missing person being presumed dead. The official narrative Brenda presented, a worried stepmother waiting anxiously for a child who never came home, collided violently with her private digital activity. What kind of large items was Brenda contemplating disposing of? Why would these questions arise in her mind so early in the timeline, hours before official search efforts began, hours before she even reported Emily missing? These searches weren't just suspicious. They painted a picture of premeditation, or at the very least a stark awareness of a situation far more dire than Brenda was letting on. It changed Brenda from distraught witness to prime suspect, all based on a few keystrokes and the timestamp next to them. That's where it gets strange, and the questions only compounded from there. The bank records speak. The disturbing web searches Brenda made, asking about how long before a missing person is presumed dead and how to dispose of large items, were a critical shift. They suggested a sinister calculation, not just a frantic search for a missing stepdaughter. But the investigation into Brenda didn't stop there. Detectives needed to understand her circumstances, her financial state, her motivations, anything that could connect her to Emily's disappearance. That's where the bank records came into play. On Monday, November 4, 2019, investigators obtained Brenda Jenkins' financial statements. What they uncovered was significant, a detail that immediately raised a red flag. Just days before Emily vanished, a substantial sum was withdrawn from a joint account Brenda shared with David. An unexplained withdrawal of $10,000, a large sum, taken not long before Emily disappeared. This wasn't merely a personal expense. It was an anomaly in their financial history, a sudden sizable outflow of cash that begged for an explanation. Why would Brenda need such a large amount of cash, so abruptly and secretly, days before her stepdaughter went missing? The official version leaves this unexplained. This wasn't a small inconsistency. This was a direct financial transaction, leaving a clear paper trail, and it painted a picture far removed from a grieving stepmother searching for a child. The records showed a deliberate action. This suggested motive, opportunity, and a deeply unsettling secret. What doesn't add up is the timing, a significant withdrawal, right before everything changed. The evidence suggests this was not an impulsive act. The bank records spoke volumes, but they didn't yet tell the whole story. The police were building a case, fact by fact, on conflicting statements, forensic evidence, and now, a financial anomaly. It was a pattern emerging, piece by piece against Brenda's initial narrative. But more pieces were still needed to make the picture clear, pieces that would soon connect to the suspicious activity of that Monday evening. The neighbor's observation. The bank records, of course, were merely a paper trail of Brenda Jenkins' financial desperation, but the true weight of her actions, what she might have done to secure that money, began to surface with another piece of quiet observation. On Wednesday, November 6th, nearly a week and a half after Emily vanished, detectives spoke with Mrs. Henderson. She was a neighbor, living just across the street from the Jenkins home. Her statement, initially given without much thought, painted a deeply disturbing picture. Mrs. Henderson told investigators she saw Brenda Jenkins on the evening of Monday, October 21st, the very night Emily was reported missing. It was around 9 p.m. She observed Brenda struggling to load a large, heavy tarp-wrapped item into her SUV. Mrs. Henderson noted Brenda seemed unusually agitated, an observation that now, in retrospect, takes on a chilling significance. At the time, Mrs. Henderson simply assumed it was garden waste, perhaps some old furniture. But that detail matters. The timing of this sighting aligns perfectly with the forensic pathologist's later estimate for Emily's time of death, Monday evening. It also directly contradicts Brenda's insistent narrative that Emily never returned home from school that day. What was Brenda loading at 9 p.m., an hour after she reported Emily missing, if not Emily herself? And why the tarp? The evidence suggests a prepared concealment, not a frantic reaction to a sudden event. It raises an important question: was Brenda already moving Emily's body while her father, David Jenkins, was still hours away on a business trip, oblivious to the horror unfolding? The hidden life insurance. The neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, believed she saw Brenda struggling with garden waste that Monday evening, a mundane detail, easily dismissed. But let's re-examine that specific Monday, October 21, 2019. It's the same day Emily Jenkins disappeared. Now, the phrase struggling to load a large, heavy tarp-wrapped item into her SUV takes on a far more sinister meaning. This observation, coupled with Brenda's financial discrepancies and suspicious web searches, began to paint a picture. But what investigators found next would provide a motive so stark, so cold, it solidified their growing suspicions. It was on Friday, November 8th, just over 2 weeks after Emily vanished, when the paper trail led them to something hidden, a life insurance policy. Not just any policy, but one for Emily Jenkins, taken out by Brenda just 3 months prior. A policy naming Brenda as the sole beneficiary, for a sum of $500,000. This detail matters because it introduces a complete shift in context. What began as a missing persons case, clouded by an unconvincing stepmother's account, now had a clear financial incentive. The timeline, the contradictions, they all coalesced around this $500,000 figure. The official version, the one where Emily just ran away, suddenly makes no sense. Why would a stepmother, facing no immediate threat to her stepdaughter's life, take out such a policy, and why just 3 months before Emily's disappearance? The evidence suggests this was not a coincidence. This wasn't protection. This was a plan, an investment. The very existence of this policy implies a level of premeditation that is deeply disturbing. It raises the question: was Emily Jenkins worth more to Brenda Jenkins dead than alive? A pattern of exploitation. The discovery of the life insurance policy, naming Brenda as the sole beneficiary for $500,000, wasn't just a motive. It was a window into a disturbing pattern. It forced investigators to re-examine everything they thought they knew about Brenda Jenkins. That detail matters. Police records, reviewed meticulously by detectives, revealed Brenda had a history of financial difficulties. Before marrying David, she was heavily in debt. This wasn't simply a recent struggle. It was chronic. And then, another uncomfortable truth surfaced. Her previous marriage, too, ended under suspicious circumstances. Not with an accident or illness, but again, involving a substantial insurance payout. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was a repeated narrative. The paper trail tells a different story than the grieving stepmother persona Brenda had carefully constructed. It suggested a calculated, cold approach to personal relationships, viewing them perhaps as financial mechanisms. This new information transformed Emily's disappearance from a tragic missing persons case into a suspected and premeditated act of financial exploitation. It painted a picture of a woman leveraging human connections for monetary gain, leaving a trail of questions wherever she went. The official version of Brenda Jenkins, the distraught stepmother, began to crumble under the weight of these discovered patterns. What doesn't add up is the sheer audacity of this repeated maneuver. To marry, gain trust, then benefit from an unexpected payout, twice. The evidence was building, pointing away from an accidental tragedy and towards a chillingly familiar strategy. The final confrontation. The final confrontation with Brenda Jenkins was not a sudden breakthrough, but a slow, methodical tightening of inescapable facts. Detectives had meticulously built their case, piece by agonizing piece. They laid out the life insurance policy, the one Brenda took out just 3 months prior, naming herself as sole beneficiary for $500,000, a stark financial motive. Then came the web searches. How long before missing person is presumed dead? How to dispose of large items? Queries made by Brenda on the very Monday Emily vanished, hours after Emily was last confirmed seen entering the house. The blood on Emily's bedroom rug, professionally cleaned but still detectable, pointed to a struggle within the home, directly contradicting Brenda's initial narrative that Emily never returned from school. That small detail mattered immensely. Next, the bank records. A $10,000 withdrawal from a joint account, just days before the disappearance. And then, the neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who recalled Brenda struggling to load a large tarp-wrapped item into her SUV around 9 p.m. that Monday evening. Mrs. Henderson's observation, initially dismissed as a woman carrying garden waste, now spoke volumes. Each piece on its own might have been dismissed. Together, they painted an undeniable picture. But the undeniable weight came with the anonymous tip. The remote wooded area, the old hunting cabin, the shallow grave, and the final agonizing confirmation. The remains were Emily Jenkins. The cause of death, a blow to the head, consistent with struggle. Time of death, Monday, October 21st, all evidence connected back to Brenda. When presented with this overwhelming evidence, the calm, collected facade of Brenda Jenkins finally shattered. The hours of interrogation, the steadfast denials, crumbled under the irrefutable truth. She admitted it all. The heated argument with Emily over the college scholarship money Brenda had intended to claim for herself. The sudden, violent escalation, the desperate cover-up. It was not a sudden act of malice, but a tragic, impulsive moment fueled by greed, leading to a calculated, desperate attempt to erase Emily's existence. On Friday, November 15, 2019, Brenda Jenkins was formally charged with Emily's murder. The official narrative, so carefully constructed by Brenda, completely unraveled, replaced by the grim reality of a financial motive and a life tragically cut short. This case, like so many others, highlights the meticulous, often thankless work of investigators who don't rely on assumptions, but on the cold, hard trail of evidence left behind. It's a stark reminder of how quickly greed can turn a life into a case file, and how the smallest overlooked details can eventually become the loudest statements. Case closed. For now. If you found this investigation compelling, please like this video and subscribe to the evidence log for more deep dives into cases that demand careful scrutiny. Next time, we'll be examining a case where an entire family vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a cryptic note and a deeply unsettling question.